Hello, I'm Brennan Storr, host of the Ghost Story Guys podcast.
And I'm Joseph Comeau of In Search of Ghosts.
And this is Weird Together, where we talk about the latest and greatest in paranormal entertainment because, well, we're weird and you're weird, so why not be weird together?
Weird Together is part of the Ghost Story Guys family of podcasts that includes things like Mysteries and Monsters, Luke Lore, and Book of the Dead. Did I get that right?
That was actually much more dramatic than my intro for Book of the Dead, so you're hired, man. You're hired.
Nice, okay.
Trying to upstage me over here. Come on, get out. Out. There's only room for one diva on this stage, sir. One.
My bad.
Hello, everyone who's here. Thank you for joining us. This is our second episode, and we are so excited to have you guys here. And this time around, we're going to be talking about an actual horror movie. Last time we talked about a paranormal doc. This time we're going to be talking about a horror movie, but it connects to real world shit. And so we thought that's one of the reasons we thought it would be a great fit for the show. And that is the horror film The Scary of 61st, also sometimes referred to as The Scary of 61st Street, depending on who you talk to. And that was directed.
Sorry.
What's that?
Oh, never mind.
Okay.
I'm just jumping all over you there.
Jumping out west, story of my life. That's fine.
Yeah, right.
And that was directed by Dasha Nekrasova, who you might know from the very, very popular, incredibly popular, I should say, Red Scare podcast. She's also an actress. She's been in Succession. I can't think of the other thing she's been off the top of my head. I believe it's Succession.
Yeah, she has a small bit in that, yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So Scary tells the story of Noelle and Addie, longtime friends who moved into a suspiciously cheap apartment in New York's Upper East Side. So obviously when it's, that cheap in New York, something's up. So before long, they meet the girl, a mysterious young woman who tells them their apartment was once one of Jeffrey Epstein's many flop houses. So the news unravels Addie, obsesses Noelle, who joins the girl in trying to unravel the conspiracy around Epstein's alleged suicide. So clearly it's off to a good start.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, it starts off grim. I mean, anything that connects to that son of a bitch. And I'll be honest, I don't even like saying his name. Mm-hmm. I was talking to my cousin earlier today, and he had just finished watching that Jimmy Savile documentary that dropped on Netflix. And of course, Jimmy Savile was very famous children's entertainer in England, who turned out to be quite frankly a monster. And I just hate even saying these bastards' names. So we're going to try and keep it to a minimum, but being that this is a central part of the film, that's going to be hard, But
yeah, you never want to platform someone or give air to someone like that. But there, like you say, there's no way around it with this film. It's such a central part of the plot.
And I mean, how do you cut off air to a guy who had his own private fucking island? Well, I'm not going to say your name. Oh, I'll go cry about it in my mansion on my private island.
Yeah. So anyway, this was an interesting one. After you watched it, or while you'd watch it, you kind of messaged me and kind of apologized preemptively because I hadn't seen it yet. So, that kind of gives you an idea what we were in for with this one. So,
yes. So before we get started, we just want to say, if you guys want to write in, tell us what you think. We love hearing from you. That's half the point of the show. So if you're out there, if you're on, I believe we're live on multiple platforms. I think we're on Twitch, maybe on Facebook. I'm not totally sure. I should have checked this, but hey, here we are. But we're definitely on YouTube. So feel free to comment, and we'll definitely be checking in throughout the show. And of course, we have something we did on the last show is once we get the comments really going, we'll pick our weirdo of the week, or by week, I guess, which is not. Anyways, nope, not going to touch that. But yes. Our first comment is from Rebecca. She just says, "Hey guys, hello Rebecca." Rebecca's a longtime listener of my podcast, The Ghost Story Guys.
I believe Rebecca was our weirdo for the last one, if I'm not mistaken.
Possibly, I don't remember. I don't write these things down, Joseph.
She was very active in the chat last time. I really appreciated her being part of this. So it's good to have you back, Rebecca. Thanks for being here with us.
Yes. All right. So first things first. You don't ever watch anything in a vacuum, right? No matter what you're watching, if it's a movie or a TV show or, I don't know, a YouTube short while you're sitting on the john, you take everything you've ever seen in there with you. And so everything you watch has baggage. All right. So, Joseph, going into the Scary of 61st, what kind of baggage did you have?
You know, it's my baggage is in some ways my lack of baggage, because I'm not really a real film buff, and I know that's much more your area. I mean, I've watched movies before, but I'm not, really deeply into independent films. So, I just knew Brennan, suggested this film that we watch it. So I knew I was in for something. But, if anything, I'd probably go into it without, or with maybe a lot more mainstream sensibilities about film, without a really strong sense of what to expect from independent and low budget films like this. I mean, I've seen a few, but maybe I wasn't quite prepared for this particular genre and some of the ways it attempts to be and tends to be transgressive, and some of the various nuances and subtleties and nods to other films within these genres. So
Sure. And can I just say for a minute, I want to live just for a second in the world where this is the first movie you've ever seen, where I'm like dragging you screaming into the modern era, and you're there like those people who screamed when the film of the train coming towards them, and you just think a bunch of really horny, uptight New York demons are living in your television, and you're throwing holy water at it. That's the world I want to live in, just for a second, and we'll move on. But I was just imagining you just living in absolute, you're hitting your television with a broom. Get out, get out.
Get thee behind me, Satan.
Yeah, exactly. Go have your sweaty lesbian sex somewhere else. Which is not a sentence I ever thought I'd say.
And if only that were the worst, most transgressive part of it. I mean, we want to keep this. Yeah. All
right. So the baggage I brought into it, I didn't know much about the film. Obviously we're just starting the show, so we're trying to find entertainment that sort of bridges the gap between, like paranormal documentary or, and sort of my horror films, which are very much my wheelhouse. I watch a lot of movies. I watch anywhere from 30 to 50 movies a month. And so a lot of them are cheap, shitty horror movies, and some of them are really great horror movies, which are also cheap. I knew about Scary of 61st only really that it was kind of satirical, and that got my hackles up for a few reasons, because frankly the world we live in is fucking beyond satire. So there's that. Two, often, not this film, but often some people don't seem to grasp exactly what satire means, and sometimes I think intellectual people don't necessarily also grasp what satire is. They think satire means everything is funny all the time. And so, and certainly, I watched this movie 3 times for this stream. You're welcome. I watched the film itself, and then I bought the Blu-ray from Vinegar Syndrome, which was just really mostly an excuse to buy something from Vinegar Syndrome because I love their stuff. Vinegar Syndrome, sponsor us, please. Send me something nice. Send me a T-shirt. That'd be great. Excuse me. But I watched the 2 commentary tracks on there, and one of them was the film, 2 film historians, and I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but there we go. Alexandra Heller Nicholas and Josh Nelson. And it was really, really good. But there was a couple points where I believe it was Heller Nicholas said, I scream laughed so much throughout this movie. And I thought, nope. There's a couple funny parts, sure, but no. And I was a little bit wary of that. I was also wary of the whole Epstein thing, just because I think we really I thought kind of, was it tasteless making a horror film out of something that is a very, very real, horrible series of crimes that really probably are continuing to happen. But, and we can talk about this later, but the historians, they made a point. They said Netflix is constantly fucking cranking out true crime documentaries. And they said, are they any less exploitative? And I think they made a great point, because it's just entertainment. You can say, well, I'm educating myself, but are you really? Or is it just, again, I watched some true crime. I'm not knocking it, but I don't think, with that perspective, I had to kind of admit, okay, maybe this isn't any less, any more exploitative than those. And the last thing that I kind of went in knowing with baggage was I knew it was shot on 16 millimeter, and that's a very conscious choice nowadays to shoot something on film instead of digital, because digital is cheaper. Obviously it's a lot less risky. And sometimes if you're watching, like, if you're watching something on 16 mil or shot on 16 mil, that miserable shit is going to happen.
Right.
Like 8 millimeter people are going to straight up get murdered. That's just snuff films. That's what that is. Snuff films, your granddad's like weird war crime films that you find underneath his bed. And 16 mil is like backyard wrestling. And, which, Aronofsky shot The Wrestler on 16 mil and things like this. And 16 mil is pretty. Like, I really like it. Joe Begos is a film Bliss was a vampire film that he shot on 16 mil. And it has like a weight and a presence that other shit just doesn't. Digital, unless it's treated really well and you're working with people who really know lighting and cinematography, digital can just look really flat, So, so I appreciated that, but I was very aware of like, okay, is this going to be artsy fartsy nonsense, or is this actually going to be something I want to enjoy? And that was probably the baggage I went in with. But Rebecca has a point.
Yeah. So Rebecca says, personally not a fan of true crime. To me, it glorifies the horrible things people do and encourages people to do awful things, to be on TV, movies, whatever. And I think that's a fair critique. And, it gets to be tough. For some people, we sometimes forget that there are people out there who are impressionable. Sometimes we assume everyone has the awareness and sensibility to look at something and say, this is art, this is media, it's a commentary. And some folks don't have that that kind of examined way of looking at things, and just something seems cool or interesting or inspires something. And, so that's a fair, not everyone is going to look at it through the same lens and kind of step back and look at it objectively.
Yeah. Something else on that subject that I think we should acknowledge, because the film does take place in New York City. There was a terrible subway shooting today in New York City, in Brooklyn specifically. I believe 10 people were injured. So far as I know, no one was killed. But I think it would be inappropriate not to mention that, since we're talking about crime in New York, that happened today. So, just to mention that. You can look it up. There's articles out there everywhere. I have sort of tried not to learn too much, because after a while, it's hard to soak up all the horror happening in the world.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And on an aside, like, my wife is a therapist for her work. So she deals with people's real life messed up stuff and has to work with people and hear a lot of things. And, years ago, after getting into this field, she really kind of came to a point where she can't watch horror films or anything with this type of theme, just because she has too much real, shit like that she has to listen to every day. And so, the world, we know the world's a messed up place. Definitely hope for that everything, that everyone who was injured, hopefully, is a full and speedy recovery. And I appreciate that you mentioned that, because we need to acknowledge, that today. So,
yeah, we're not just here to make jokes about sweaty lesbian sex, as I mentioned.
I mean, we'll do that, but we're humans too. Yeah.
Funny enough, and we're going to get to the spooky stuff here in a sec, that was apparently not her choice.
Interesting.
Nekrasova was saying in the commentary, she kind of just touched on it briefly, but she sort of implied that was someone else's idea. And she said it's a queer film begrudgingly. So I got the impression that the sex scene was perhaps not her idea, which is kind of interesting all on its own. But we are talking about a horror movie, and even though this is a fictional horror movie, it does deal with the themes which run through both our shows, In Search of Ghosts and the Ghost Story Guys, and that is, of course, the spooky stuff. All right, so Scary of 61st kind of deals with the obvious thing, I guess, is possession. Technically, you could say it's a possession movie. Although, even in the commentary track, the director kind of says that it's sort of open to interpretation as to whether she is actually possessed, or whether the revelation that they're living in one of Jeffrey Epstein's townhouses pushes her over, because there is definitely the suggestion that she was abused as a young girl. There's reference to the fact that her father is very wealthy and very prone to kind of just giving her money. And not to get too deep into this, because this is not for the show, but I knew someone who was very, very similar, and, kind of the same thing. The parents would give them anything, but it was very much I don't know how you describe it. Like it was guilt money is what it was.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the film definitely deals with demonic possession. And I kind of want to see what you think about this. On Ghost Story Guys, we talk a lot about this idea that, I don't necessarily believe in Satan, Christian Satan, but one of the commentators on the tracks, so one of the people on the commentary tracks, Jesus Christ, they referred
he was on the commentary.
Yeah, he was. It was great.
Okay.
He was really weirdly into it. Yeah. Let's not go there.
Yeah. Right.
There's a holes in his hands joke that is just going to get you fired.
Yes.
So,
no.
But this idea that like guys like Epstein, and the people he ran with, these disgusting monsters who victimize children, that their accumulation of wealth is almost satanic in a way. That kind of wealth, it just leads you to this sort of what's the word I'm looking for? This kind of like, not bacchanal, but you have nothing left to strive for. So you start really digging in and you start exploring the far reaches of the human experience, and that never goes towards like bringing pure bliss to the world. It always goes towards like, how much horror can you inflict? Yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There's some different ways you could look at that, because certainly there's some different moral frameworks, and is power and wealth somehow evil. I as someone with more of a social science background, I look at things more from like a kind of a psychology, maybe even think about just almost a little evolutionary psychology in terms of you mentioned, is there a thing to strive for, right? And one of the things that keeps us going as a human is when we're trying to do something productive and move forward, and we have goals. And you bring up an interesting point about, if you've accumulated so much wealth and success, like, game over, you've won capitalism, what's next, kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
What becomes your motivation? And humans, I do think there's something about our psychology where we're either moving forward, or we're either living or dying. We're either trying to grow, progress, do something new, acquire a new skill, gain something new, move forward, or start the process of dying, right? And so when you get to that point where you've won capitalism, you have nothing else to gain, what is there left to gain? Well, there's power, right? There's gratification, there's exploring new and more depraved corners of the human world. So what happens when you have someone who's in this place, and for schlubs like you and I, it's like, hey, getting to be millionaires would be like, wow, an amazing accomplishment. And then you get someone like, like the name we won't mention, or someone in a powerful position who's like, yeah, I've done that, 20 times over. What's next? People start to seek power and maybe become less human. Something about what they're seeking takes them to these different places. So, in a psychological way, that makes a lot of sense, I think. And, is it something more, in terms of spiritually, I guess it depends what your moral framework is on that.
I was thinking in terms of he who shall not be named. Obviously, we're going to have to say names a bunch. So I thought we should give him a name. And I think we should call him Whistledik.
Okay, I think that works.
Whistledik. So
okay,
you have tenure. You can say that.
Yes. So someone like Whistledik, like, it becomes power, control, gratification of increasingly, I know I sound like a very moralistic person, but increasingly depraved sorts of things that he's seeking to gratify. And then he crosses this line where he is than victimizing people in search of that gratification.
Yeah, and part of me wonders if you don't get to be that rich unless you are Rebecca approves of Whistledick. And we had someone else there. Was it Stephanie?
Yeah, I put a comment up there, so appreciate Stephanie being here and commenting.
Yeah, Stephanie, a passion for growth. Yeah, not everyone seems to have that apparently.
Yeah,
but I wonder, if you don't get to be Whistledick rich unless you're already a monster. Like maybe in order to accumulate Whistledick money, you have to have this hole in your chest where your heart should be. And then you try and fill that hole with orgasms and foie gras and desserts covered in gold leaf. Like that's all I can figure, right? And I do wonder if there is something to that, because let's face it, there are no good billionaires. There are none. Zero. Zilch. Jeff Bezos, I know you're listening from your fucking moon station like Batman. Every empire is built on bones. Every single stinking one. Don't ever let anyone tell you different. So I kind of think that you can't be wealthy. You can't be a billionaire. You have to break backs. You have to step on people, a lot of people. And so I think that you don't get to be Whistledick rich unless you've got that hole inside you. And I think, because I imagine if someone gave me $1 billion, the shit I could do, the good shit I could do. I mean, sure, I would also own an impressive collection of vintage pornography, like even more so than I do now.
Right.
But at the same time, I could do so much good with that money.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you get to that place unless you're already incapable of making that decision, because you have to. No, please go ahead.
I'm going to be a little more generous in my treatment of billionaires, although I'm as critical as many on this population.
This is Joseph coming out in defense of Whistledick. Just let's be clear about
whoa.
Ghislaine, we see you hiding back there.
Right. Now there may or may not be a check from Bezos on my way. But no, I will say this. I think a lot of people, if someone becomes that wealthy and powerful, they absolutely at minimum have to accept a sort of moral compass that you and I don't, in terms of this very, kind of power oriented. You don't become, we're talking about someone like Bill Gates. You don't become Bill Gates wealthy without being a cutthroat business person, with Microsoft trying to become a monopoly and everything they've done. But I think a lot of those folks do somehow rationalize that this is the game. Don't hate the player, hate the game, so to speak. But I think where I'm going to be the most generous in this is when they reach that point where they've spent all these years stepping on people's necks to get where they're at, and at the expense of other folks, and they reach that point of billionaire, they do probably get to this point where what's next? What do I do now? Some attempt to do positive things, philanthropy. Now we may question, the virtue and the morality of, becoming a billionaire by exploiting, labor as much as they do, just to turn around and kind of pat themselves on the back, by trying to solve some sort of, world problem that might not have been there if it weren't for billionaires. But at minimum, they get to the point where they reach that place, and some will try to do something that's perceived as positive to try to make a difference, and other people will create a rape island. And it's just so. Yeah. Sorry, I shouldn't have laughed at that. Yeah, no. So there's a point where they diverge, and they can kind of choose which way, if they're going to try to do something that at least tries to give lip service to making a difference for other people versus self-gratification.
I mean, I wish more people took the road that didn't go to Rape Island. I'm going to stop saying that, but because it's a bad word to just throw around. But yeah, to Dick Whistle Island. I just wish Whistledick.
Yes.
But yeah, like I wish more people took the other road. And frankly, I think if they did, the world would be a better place. Hannah says, I joined at a strange time. Yes, you did.
Indeed.
I'm sorry.
Indeed.
But yeah, so I think that it's possible, but at least in this case of the Scary of 61st, we're not dealing with that kind of billionaire. We're dealing with the
Whistledown.
There we go. Ellis says, good people would never be or stay that loaded because they would use their wealth to help those in need. Yep, I tend to agree, Ella. I tend to agree.
Yeah.
But Joseph is on the side of the aristocracy.
No, I think some of them.
When the revolution comes, you're the first against the wall.
I think some of them try to redeem themselves. To what degree they do is up to debate.
Yeah. So this obviously informs the Scary of 61st because, as we mentioned, the film is about two girls, Addie and Noelle, who get this crazy cheap apartment in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which is a place where cheap real estate does not exist. Cheap real estate doesn't fucking exist in New York, period. But especially on the Upper East Side, that's a lot of old money, as I understand it. I don't know a lot about New York, but I recall hearing that at some point. And they discover that, this was the home of Jeffrey Epstein. And they discover that, one of his many townhouses. And they discover this because the girl arrives at their door and tells them. And the girl is played by Dasha Nekrasova, the director. And Nekrasova, she's an interesting character. I'd never heard of her prior to watching the film. And I did listen to an episode of Red Scare. I wasn't crazy about it, just not my kind of podcast, but I mean, they have 13,000 patrons, so they're doing something right. I'm certainly not going to waste breath knocking them because, again, there are many, many more people who feel differently. But she apparently knew someone who was victimized by Whistledown. So, she has some basis for telling this story, which once I discovered that, I was a little more, okay, I'm not as judgmental about, the use of the subject matter. But she comes and she tells them this, and they both deal with it in different ways. Noelle kind of partners up with the girl, and they start furiously investigating this to try and learn more. In a way, I think a lot of people did when all this shit came out, especially after he was killed in prison, because let's face it, he didn't fucking kill himself. Or if he did, he had help. But they kind of go off and do the Nancy Drew thing, and Addie just spirals out in a way that leads to a very, very graphic masturbation scene in front of his townhouse, in front of Whistledown's townhouse. And apparently they actually shot that there. They shot for 3 hours at 4 a.m. This scene of her like frantically masturbating in front of his house. And I applaud the guerrilla filmmaking effort there. I just applaud the give no fucks. You know what? We're just going to do this thing. And like we were saying, it's never really nailed down as to exactly what is happening and whether she's being possessed or she's just having this like a psychotic break. But it just gets worse for her. And it leads to a scene where she is, and this is the scene where I texted you. I literally paused the movie and texted you because I said there's a scene where Addie is having sex with her boyfriend, or rather her boyfriend is joylessly pumping away on top of her while she, sort of, I don't know, pretends to enjoy it. And she says, because again, she is either having a psychotic break or she's possessed with some kind of terrible spirit. She says, fuck me like I'm 13 years old. And we just lost a viewer there. I can't say I blame you. And I texted you right away, and I was kidding, but I was also very serious. I said, hey, I didn't know this was coming when I recommended this movie. Make sure you don't watch this when your kids are awake, or B, your wife is around. And if your wife is around, please apologize to her for me and let her know that I did not know this was coming. And I guess I should have expected it, right? I guess given what we're dealing with, perhaps that line could not ever have been anticipated, but at the same time, bad shit was going to happen.
Yeah, I think it was about that point when I kind of was asking myself, is this a horror film, some sort of sexual fever dream, or like a transgressive commentary on like urban dwellers and, Gen Z urban dwellers? And it definitely, that was the point where when I kind of like, ooh, Brennan's pulled me into some interesting territory here. I see where this is going. Okay. this is what I've signed up for. No, but that obviously there. I mean, not to make light of that though. That's a really difficult scene. It's really problematic, and it's a really transgressive scene, and that's if you're including something like that in a film, you're dancing a very delicate line between trying to make a commentary and doing something that's really just kind of inappropriate and ill-advised. So
yeah, and I mean something that the historians on the commentary track pointed out, they said that I have a note here. They believed that the sexuality of Addie's character was pushed so far and exaggerated so much because then you couldn't ignore it.
mm-hmm.
It was pushed so far that you couldn't. It's not hot. There's no way you could construe it as sexy. Because obviously I think in an exploitation film, the point would be to kind of turn people on, right? And that is certainly not what's happening. There's nothing whatsoever sexually appealing about all of this. It's pushed to a point of excess. So, it works on that level. And Nekrasova made a really, excuse me, sound like my niece for a second there. My voice is, I've got these terrible seasonal allergies, so my voice is just for shit. I actually landed my first ever paid voiceover role, and then I lost my fucking voice. So this is how my week is going. But in an interview, Nekrasova said that when she was concepting her character, because as we mentioned, she plays the girl, she said that one of the things the girl does, both the girl and Noelle, especially Noelle, but the girl particularly, when Addie starts to break down, she really judges her quite harshly.
Mm-hmm.
And this has come up in reviews where people said, well, this is fucked up because these girls are allegedly investigating this vast conspiracy of wealth, which involves victimization. And yet they're ignoring this person right next to them who's very clearly been the subject of this and is very clearly going through something. And, the point Nekrasova made was that in actual fact, she concepted it that way. She to her, the character of the girl is actually very vulnerable and very weak. And she recognizes that, and she is afraid of Addie's weakness. And so she shuns her. And that's really interesting because I think that speaks to a real psychological truth, right? You reject in others the qualities you dislike most in yourself.
That's interesting. I just, you have a much deeper view of this than I did, having watched these commentaries. I saw it a little more at a surface level, and Noelle was really just like a shitty friend and shitty roommate. And there's a point, I mean, in multiple ways, right? The girl busts in, pukes in her bathroom, and is just really, really sketchy. And Noelle's immediate like, hey, will you be my best friend? Screw Addie, right? They're immediately besties. And then at that point, really late in the movie, there's a point where Addie is speaking in a very infantile way. And it's almost like Noelle doesn't immediately recognize that something is wrong until 5 minutes into the conversation. She's finally like, are you okay? She's just been talking like she's, like she's 7 for all this time. And you're such a shitty friend. You don't even notice that something's up. So yeah, there was, and then, the girl just kind of ignored Zaddy, which really, as you've alluded to, is apparently intended to be because something about her vulnerability that she doesn't like. So
yeah, I mean, when I watched it, I told you after the first watch through, I said, I think there's more happening here because some of the flaws, the thing we mentioned, the fact that the girl is, a detective, but she just can't detect. She doesn't detect shit.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some debate between us as to how intentional this was.
Mm-hmm.
You were suspicious of the Stephanie says sounds complex, and it's like I said, there's more going on under the hood than I thought, because like I said, we had that conversation and then I listened to the commentary track and I kind of thought, I don't know if Joseph was wrong about this, because the commentary track with Dasha and Madeline Quinn, who plays Noelle and was also the co-writer, it's terrible. It's real. It's boring. Dasha vapes next to the fucking microphone, which just as someone who's a big nerd about audio stuff drove me goddamn crazy. And it wasn't until that was dropped, and I don't even necessarily know that she dropped it. I feel like that may have been brought up by one of the historians referencing an interview she gave. But and I realized, no, she's conscious of the fact that the girl is a bad detective. That's kind of the point. She herself is running from the truth of this thing and burying herself in this like Nancy Drew narrative, but she's a shitty detective. She's not fixing anything. She's just distracting herself from her own vulnerabilities. And I think you could argue that's a big part of like true crime culture, is just trying to distract yourself from the horror and the terror around you. And no, I shouldn't say true crime culture, but people hang out on true crime forums, and not everyone, but there is like that certain subset who just bury themselves in these quote unquote investigations. And I think it's kind of an escape in a lot of ways. They're not actually helping anyone.
Yeah, there was a point late in the film where the girl says, I think maybe we're starting to get too close to the truth. And I just had to roll my eyes, because this seemed like the quintessential internet sleuth utterance. It's like, yes, you and your friend on your tinfoil hat journey that involved, scouring the internet, taking pills, and having some weird sexcapades, you've uncovered the truth of what happened with Whistledown, right? By you found just the right Reddit thread, you found just the right, deep dark corner of the internet where the answers happen. And it's a little bit of a comment, and I don't know if they meant this as a commentary, but it's like, when the difference between real research and internet research, right, is what it feels like.
And that's an argument I've had with old friends of mine, because I don't believe that watching YouTube videos is research, unless those YouTube videos are somehow like a lecture of an actual historian or something. But if you're watching like, I'm going to say, for example, Crow 777, who's one of those guys who claimed the moon was a fucking hologram, and you're watching one of his videos and you're just saying, well, see, the moon's a hologram. This guy on the internet told me. That's not research. It's just not.
Well, and I come from a academic background, right? I work as a professor, so I've published articles.
Do you maybe have some kind of PhD you wanted to
maybe? I think you said that for me last time, and will never let me live that down. But as part of earning my PhD, I had to do research that got published, and I think, and it's not to sound self-important, but like I don't know, unless you've had that experience where you've really actually done research, where you've dug into something. It doesn't have to be an academic sense, but where you're at, and to get to like what I'm going to call is actually having your hands on the data versus reading about someone's opinion. Those are two different types of ideas of research, and real research is when you're actually looking at primary documents, primary source things, looking at things that are in files, looking at data, not looking and finding a compilation of opinions by people who themselves didn't have their hands on the data. And that's the thing you learn, right? And and see, Hannah's saying YouTube videos and Google aren't research at the best. They're literature reviews signed by a PhD student. There you go.
Yeah. Hannah has another comment there that I'd like to touch on here in a minute.
Yeah. And that's a great point. So anyway, I think, and unfortunately, I think there's just generations of people who don't understand that research doesn't mean entering a search term and reading lots of stuff, right? You have to you actually have to get real data, and I think people don't really understand that. But you wanted to get to this comment about some of the stuff that seemed deeper in the film.
Yeah. So Hannah says, and I say this out loud because patrons of Ghost Story guys get the audio version of this as well. But Hannah says, I feel like if you need to watch a commentary to get that insight, the story could be told better. And you're right, Hannah. This is something Joseph and I were talking about prior to air, is this idea that there's a really fine line between material that gives the story additional context, and material which is required in order to fully appreciate the film. And that's a thin line to walk, right? Because, you know, filmmakers, I think people assume filmmakers are much more simple than they are. You know, there's a great filmmaker named either Raymond or Ramin. I don't know how to pronounce it, or Ramin. I'm not sure, but Ramin Barani, we'll say. He's done films like Man Push Cart, Chop Shop, Goodbye Solo, 100 Homes. Incredible filmmaker. He's an American filmmaker, does these wonderful independent dramas. And to what they feel very naturalistic, but there's I remember hearing about there was like a 10-minute discussion about whether or not there should be this particular sticker on the bumper of a truck in one shot. And that's not something that I'm going to look at, because it was not the focal point of the shot. It was just in the shot. And so most people watching movies, I think they just assume the camera gets pointed in a certain direction. Everyone kind of fucking goes. So, you know, filmmakers, there's often a lot going on. But you're right. You know, how well they convey that. It's not enough that they be deep. You have to be able to understand what they're putting across. And you have to understand that they're aware enough of the material to know that they are sending out the intent that they've got behind it. Again, it's not enough to have the intent. You have to be able to communicate the intent. And I will say that Scary doesn't always succeed in doing that.
I think that's a really interesting point. And maybe as I get older, my perspectives on some different things start to develop and change. And I think what you have here is with filmmakers and people who do creative, artistic sorts of things, there is a depth to what they do where they put thoughts into details that the viewer often ignores, but they do that so the viewer doesn't have to, so it doesn't stand out to the viewer. They make things look natural. But that's part of, you know, framing a beautiful shot is you have all the right balance of elements and colors and the right places. And there's a lot of strength, skill that goes into that. But I think maybe perhaps where the shortcomings fall is, like, you know, the director, I think she is definitely talented and has an eye for those things. There's enough really great visual elements in the film that you see there's a talent there. But I think sometimes when talented people are earlier and younger in their career, and they're talented, but they're still a little bit of a novice, they tinker with things and overthink things and do things. They use some of those skill sets because they can, not because it's going to create the best outcome. They're almost trying to spread their wings and show what they can do. And I think that's where, like, there are some great directors who will put all those little details in, but no more details than they need to put in to get it perfect. Right. But you have someone who's a novice who has that skill set, but they're going to put in all those details and 13 others just to demonstrate their depth of knowledge. So all those kind of little inside things, and they overdo it, right? You know, so someone, and I think that's the sign of kind of a novice is someone who over tinkers. The sign of an experienced professional is someone who knows which levers to pull, which buttons to push, and they get it dialed in right, and they don't do more than they need to. And they're both using the same skill sets and the same knowledge. It's just one understands how much you need to, and the other just kind of overdoes it.
See, I think in this case, I actually tend to think it's almost the opposite. I think this is the opposite of, pardon me. In this case, I think you've got someone who's a first-time director. I think she's done shorts before, but this is her first feature. Mm-hmm. And the script started out as a short script, and then it just grew into feature length. But I think you've got someone who is so wrapped up in their idea that it's fully developed to them.
Okay.
But that doesn't come through on the page.
Okay.
And I know in some interviews she's defended that sort of, because obviously other people have talked about it being underwritten. She's defended that by saying, well, you know, the film was finished just before COVID hit. And if we had taken the time to fully flesh out the script, obviously, you know, it just wouldn't have been possible post-COVID. And I mean, it's also, you know, someone pointed out that it's an interesting time capsule of New York just before COVID. Mm-hmm. You know, it's, you know, they sort of likened it to the films of, especially the early films of Abel Ferrara, you know, who's famously a one-time New York-based filmmaker who really kind of captured, flavors of the city at a certain time and place. But, so that's kind of been her defense is, well, if we hadn't gotten it out, then when it wouldn't happen. But at the same time, I think we didn't know COVID was coming,
Right.
unless I'm misunderstanding, what she's saying. So I think it's a little bit of like a sort of was it post facto? Is that a thing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A bit of like a what do you call it? Like a post facto defense. Like, well, if we'd taken the time, then it wouldn't have been done. We didn't know that, but
yeah.
I think it's kind of like something. I think Rebecca says it very well. The struggles of being an artist. You know what you're trying to convey, but others might not. So it's hard to get across what you are trying to, if that makes sense. No, it does. Yeah.
And I think I was commenting on is maybe more of the things where it seemed like they were overthinking some of the references that were under the surface. Right. But I think there are some things that seem maybe underdeveloped to your point. Right.
I just watched this film called Ash and Dust. It's a Canadian indie crime drama. And that's a great example of, I think, what you're talking about, where someone just way overthinks everything. Mm-hmm. But I think they actually come around to the same thing where they overthink it to the point where it actually comes out underdeveloped.
Interesting.
Because they told this is very sparse crime drama with very minimal dialogue that turned out to have kind of like sort of like a recursive time structure in a way. Mm-hmm. Like it kind of played with time, but it was so spare and so vague in its storytelling that it was hard to pick up on those things. It was very confused. It was confusing. And I'm not a stupid man.
Right.
I've seen Upstream Color. I know how words work, but, yeah. So it's tough. Like being an artist is tough. And especially when you're writing. Writing is generally speaking, a very solitary thing. So it's easy to kind of get caught up in your little world and for things to make sense to you, but then maybe not come out that way. And especially when you're working at the level they're working at. I mean, I would say the budget of this was probably low six figures. The producer, guy who plays Greg is one of the producers, Mark Rappaport. And he sort of hinted that the budget was the annual salary of a high-end financial advisor. So I want to say $200,000 or $300,000, which is not a lot of money to make a feature, a shot on film in New York. So that's, in fairness to the filmmakers, that's a limitation too.
Yeah. Well, how much of that went to the apartment, right?
The apartment was actually belonged to a friend of the production, and they were living in it at the time.
Nice.
Okay. So they were just moving around as they were filming and kind of shooting around all their shit.
Oh, geez. Okay. So that saved them quite a bit of money.
Yeah, I imagine so. Yeah. So do you have some other thoughts?
Well, in terms of like what the film is, and it was a little bit tough to tell at first whether it was, because I didn't go into it with any information. So, what was going to make it a horror film, and it was, and it is interesting that I think they did leave it kind of intentionally vague in that regard. Like you talked about, whether is it a possession or just kind of a psychological over the top thing. As far as some of the things in the commentary, you mentioned that maybe what I'm wondering is this: how much of the elements that seem a little bit forced do you think are that she actually intended it to be interpreted that way, and how much of it is that she has adopted what other people have said about the film in her commentary about it? And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. I haven't actually seen this film, but everyone knows of The Room, Tommy Wiseau's, kind of cult classic. And,
of course,
that's known for being a really poorly done film, but he has leaned into this idea that it was intentionally kind of this, comedy, that he was spoofing himself or something, and that he intended it to be what it has become, when really, I think that's probably not the case, but he's kind of embraced that and post facto sort of made that what it is. Do you think any of the things that maybe seem like they don't fit or they're forced in terms of the deeper ideas in the commentary, or things that aren't what the director set out to intend, but that sounds good, yeah, and then she kind of embraces that?
It's hard to say. I mean, I would not want to speculate because I think it would be pure speculation. But it's possible. I mean, like I said, the commentary track from the film historians was so much more engaging, and they brought so much more context to the film, which again allowed me to appreciate it on a much deeper level.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if you wanted to say that was purely them, and they brought sort of a lot of that, but then some of their commentary was sourced from her interviews. And I got to say, most of the reviews of the film were not very kind. I think there were I shouldn't say most, because I think it's fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, but there were a lot of very unkind things said in interviews, or pardon me, in reviews. And so I don't necessarily, and I'm going to be honest, a lot of film criticism is trash. Like there's maybe a handful of really great film writers out there, but a lot of them are they're operating at a pretty surface level. So some of the stuff I think would be unlikely that they would be coming from that. But again, I don't know. I mean, she doesn't seem like a stupid woman. Yeah. So I'm willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. And obviously her podcast is much more popular than mine. So she could crush me if she wanted to. So I'm not going to be mean.
Right. That's fair.
Before we go, because we're getting towards the end of the show, we wanted to talk about, or we should bring up the note.
Yes. So there was a note on the piano, right?
Yes. So at the end of the film, it's discovered that that the girl was right, that she actually is being watched, and that she was close to the dark heart of this conspiracy. And she finds a note on the piano in the apartment.
Now I got to tell you, when I first read this note, I wasn't familiar with any references that I think you are, but it just read very awkwardly. Give up your inquiries, which are completely useless, and the way it's worded and written, it felt like an instructions manual for something that was poorly translated to English, just like the command of the language. So I don't know. That was my take. I know that's not very, very in depth, but it certainly seemed a little odd. So what was your take on the letter?
So the text of the letter: give up your inquiries, which are completely useless, and consider these words a second warning. We hope for your own good that this will be sufficient. This is word for word the same letter that Tom Cruise's character is left at the end of Eyes Wide Shut, which is Stanley Kubrick's final film, and of course famously deals with the dark corridors of power and the sexual exploitation that happens there. So that's completely intentional. And Nekrasova has said multiple times that she kind of always intended this film to be set in what she calls the Eyes Wide Shut extended universe. She sort of envisions this film as kind of being like a side sequel to Eyes Wide Shut.
How's that compare to the Marvel extended universe?
Frankly, at this point, I'm more excited for more Eyes Wide Shut stuff.
Okay.
I'm still going to go see Doctor Strange. Don't get me wrong, but
it's not as oversaturated.
Yeah. So, and that's interesting, right? Because Eyes Wide Shut, if you haven't seen it, it's long, but I think time has been very kind to it. And of course, it just deals with this married couple who kind of have this rift develop between them, and the husband kind of goes off in search of sexual adventure and ends up in far deeper waters than he had expected. And I mean, something Nekrasova has said in interviews is that he's way ahead of his time. The things Kubrick talked about, people kind of went, oh, blah, 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 secret societies, people having giant fuck parties. Well, seems very unlikely. And now, not only do we know people are having giant fuck parties, there's Fuck Party Island.
Right.
So this is not impossible. And yeah, so her point is that, the Kubrick was ahead of its time. And, she acknowledges, she says, I'm not Kubrick. This film is not, Kubrick was very known for being meticulous and how he composed the shots and all these things. This film is not that way, and she acknowledges that, she points out in the commentary, to her credit, several different scenes, which she said, man, I wish I'd done this differently, or I wish, X, Y, and Z. So she's aware of many of the film's shortcomings, but so she's not comparing herself to Kubrick or anything like that. But I think she makes a really salient point. I think she's right. I think Kubrick was ahead of his time, because we know so much more about the world, and most of the shit we've learned ain't great.
Yeah, I wonder if for all the criticisms one might levy at this film, for those who watch it, the fact that it maybe draws attention back to Kubrick's film might be a service that it does within sort of the artistic community.
Yeah, and a great point that I think is it Heller Nicholas says on the second commentary track. She says that they both feel very New York, and there are several shots in Scary which harken back to the New York of Eyes Wide Shut, which is kind of funny because Eyes Wide Shut was all shot on a studio backlot in London.
Interesting.
I don't think aside from maybe establishing shots, I don't think there are any genuine New York shots in the whole film. But they both managed to, in their own way, feel like New York. And I just wonder if maybe that's because New York itself has become so much a part of myth, sort of on-screen myth that, the same way like the people who we see on screen look more real than real because that's kind of our idealized myth, so that's sort of like the platonic ideal of people is what we see on screen, But
yeah, it's an interesting thought.
So we're going to bring it in for landing here, folks. We want to try and keep these streams below an hour. Here we were worried we wouldn't have enough for 45 minutes. Joseph, would you recommend The Scary of 61st?
To certain audiences, yes. If you want to see something that is going to stretch kind of, your perceptions and what expand your horizons of what film is, perhaps you can't have delicate sensibilities. It's definitely transgressive. But I think there are enough things in it that to folks who really like film as an art form, I think there are things worth gleaning from it and watching. I would not recommend it as just straight up entertainment for the typical viewer, but for someone who wants to look at film as an art form and have a conversation like some of the things we've talked about, then I would recommend it for that audience.
Yeah, and I would say the same. I would say if you like horror movies, if you're a fan of main films, I wouldn't even say outside the mainstream, but if just shit that's not just franchise stuff, these are the kind of movies you got to support. Even if we don't like everything about them necessarily, these are the people who are making the shit that we need to give money to, because if it was terrible, then that doesn't count. But this is not a terrible film. And I think that stuff like this, Ty West's most recent horror film, X, is really good. And it's getting harder and harder to make these movies, and it's getting harder and harder to get them seen. So that's why I watched shit like Ash and Dust, even though I didn't like it. It's just movies like this, well, they deserve, I can give it my $5 in my 90 minutes, and maybe I learn something, maybe I don't, but that's a vote for more things like that. Maybe next time they get it right, so I would recommend checking out The Scary of 61st. And before we go, of course, we have our weirdo. And I think she may not have been last time, but this time, Rebecca is definitely our weirdo. There we go.
It is a high honor. So
it truly is.
Yeah,
we're sorry?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's it for this round of Weird Together. Thank you so much for everyone who joined us live. I just cannot tell you how much we appreciate it. We're still feeling all this out. So let us know in the comments, even after you watch it. People come into this afterwards, let us know what you think. Share it around, tell us, do you want to see more paranormal documentaries? Do you want to see more horror films? We kind of see it as being a mix of the two things right now, but let us know what you think. And I'm on, of course, Twitter and Instagram as Largely the Truth. You can find me at the Ghost Story Guys podcast. Joseph?
Yeah, and you can find me on Twitter at ISO_ghosts. And then I've got a YouTube channel, In Search of Ghosts, where I do paranormal stuff as well. Appreciate, if you check that out.
All right. Until next time, I'm weird. Well, we're weird.
Yes.
You're weird. Why not be weird together? Thanks, guys.
Let me